De Caux.
Mantel.
Correct.
Cubic
Correct.
close pack. Plus
Correct.
1, minus 1, I and minus I.
Correct, yes.
Bob, do you believe AI will take us to a utopia or dystopia?
That's the big one, isn't it, Ian? But I'm positive for utopia on this, right? I mean, I see us trending into a good position, right? I mean, I think we've got to learn and adapt ourselves and our whole society for how we work with AI, and I think that will take some time, and we've got to get faster at regulating, and the governments need to get faster at being able to move with technology.
Hi, I'm Bob De Caux, and I'm studying for a PhD in complex system simulation.
Well, you're in an extremely impressive business at IFS. It's behind so many functional things, whether it's airports, wind farms, oil rigs, aircraft carriers. Do you see this hybrid human-robot world evolving over the next 10 years? Do you think we'll see AI humanoid robots on aircraft carriers, on oil rigs?
The technology and the ability for AI to do these things, I think, will be there in the next 10 years. But these industries are not resistant to change in that they don't want to do this. But as we've mentioned, with the safety and regulation, and the fact is that everything is designed around the humans, it is a massive change to their operations.
De Caux.
Mantel.
Correct.
Is there a scenario where AI becomes the future of leadership?
I think we're starting to see that already, right? I think there was it was a McKinsey study on it last year that was looking at maybe 25-30% of a CEO's role was kind of something that a digital CEO would be able to take on.
That was some very, very inspired guesses, if indeed they were guesses, or maybe you were just trying
I
to...
won't do a Guten plan.
Baseline.
If you're not doing AI and you're not really advanced with AI, you're not going to be successful. You're going to wither on the vine over the next year or so.
The baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human.
Make you question everything.
You're a chief AI officer.
Yeah.
It's an emerging role and very necessary role. It feels as though it's in the center of this confluence of technology, humanity, efficiency, philosophy. There's a lot. It's quite a thoughtful role, I believe. If you're looking at these things just from a financial officer perspective, it's a spreadsheet, right? And to your point, humanoid robots, they're too expensive right now. There's going to be a point where they're commoditized for certain roles, certain tasks, and at some point it'll flip over financially. Yeah. From an AI or a chief AI perspective, what are you thinking about? What's your role? What are the values that you're bringing to your organization and therefore customers?
Yeah, so I think, the role, it's a very grandiose description of it from you, which is great. But
I do try to.
But it is a new role, as you say, right? And I think it's kind of the natural evolution of where things have gone with AI and data science over the last 10 years, right? If you look back, 10 years ago, it tended to be that AI was the mathematicians, was the data scientists doing that work in silos, right? They would get hold of the data, someone would give them data, and they would go and prove out the concept of doing something, build a model, maybe find a way to productionize it at least, on a minimal basis, right? And then everyone was happy. It's like, well, AI can work, but it didn't have that strategic buy-in, right? It didn't have the senior stakeholders, the C-level in the business saying, I want that, right? I need that for my business. Our chairman last week actually made a good comment when I was talking to him. It's like, when I started at IFS around 6 years ago, the firm didn't need AI at that point, right? It wanted AI, it wanted to do a lot more with AI. But now, in 2025, it needs it, right? If you're not doing AI, and you're not really advanced with AI, you're not going to be successful. You're going to wither on the vine over the next year or so. So I think that the Chief AI Officer role has kind of developed into more of a strategic decision making around AI and how do we apply it to.
I mean, IFS must have a huge data set, like a cohesive cognition based on the data that you have and are creating would be one of the most fascinating language models or digital instantiations of intelligence that I can believe, whether it's, connecting the dots between power generation from wind farms to power consumption in, data centers to, all of the assets and facets of your business, being able to connect those data points and put it into some sort of cohesive intelligence just sounds like it could be one of the most positive shifts for wider populations and humanity.
I've got sort of 4 or 5 core areas of focus that I'm looking at, and that allows me to distill it down to those things to follow a little more closely. But there's always going to be something in the news or in the the newsletters you're following that will pique your interest, and it's like, oh, I'd like to know a bit more about that. And you try and find the time. It's very difficult. So it's a balancing act. I'm very good at going down rabbit holes, trying to find out more about something new and exciting. But
what are your main news sources? What are your trusted sources that you regularly look at on a daily basis?
Goodness me, that's a tough one for me. I've subscribed to a couple of newsletters, but really I follow Reddit a bit, but I also follow a lot of the new sort of software releases. Basically, that's what tends to sort of guide where I'm looking. When the new models come out, I tend to try and get hold of those, play around with
straight
those
out of the vendor.
If I can, but often there's no particular shortcut. I don't have a secret way into a lot of these places because it's all so new and it's not through all the traditional pathways. So often you're scrabbling around with everyone else. But as those things come out, it's important to try and get a bit of a flavour for them. But I do find there's the sort of day-to-day reading of something coming into your inbox, as you say, that's just like a stream of consciousness. That gets overwhelming, and I've tried signing up to quite a few of those, but you don't have the time to keep up. So I kind of pare it down as best I can, focused on just trying the new things that I think are going to be relevant to me.
Do you have a point of view on the new Llama 4 release?
Not a huge one, right? I mean, it looks quite promising at the moment. I think Llama's shown some possibilities for some of the fine tuning for some of the use cases we have in the industries I look at. Right, Llama seems to be the choice generally there, and I think Llama 4 has probably got potential to kick on with that. But no huge points of note for you there, Ian, I'm afraid.
No. It's I kind of follow a lot of the language models quite tightly because everybody is talking about context window size, number of parameters, like these KPIs of the language models. And I look at that, but when I kind of take more of a feel of when I use them, how do they make me feel? What's the quality of engagement? And I can't get past GPT-4. The Turing test passed 73% on that. Yeah. GPT 4.5, I don't think it's released yet, but I just find that human interaction of ChatGPT's OpenAI's ChatGPT really compelling.
I think if something that's out of the box, that probably is the most compelling. That's the easiest to get up and running with. Some of these other models, though, when you're looking at the enterprise, you're thinking about professional use. It's more, how could they fit into this wider ecosystem of everything I'm doing? And then it's not so much about that experience. It's, can they offer me a better way of giving answers to the specific types of questions I'm seeing? That's, I think, where these models come in. But as you say, the ChatGPT experience out of the box, that's not what we look at in industry on a day-to-day basis. But as a consumer, that's obviously what you're looking for. You want to be able to sit down, and just just get going and have that conversation. That's still probably the leader in that respect.
So in industry, what are you looking for, and what's that difference between the consumer large language model, transformer technology, to industry? What are you looking for?
I mean, the focus we always have is that we've got to start with the types of problems that our customers face, or large enterprise companies face, right? Which tend to be around trying to control their data, trying to control the myriad systems they've got everywhere. There's no easy way of doing that stuff, right? It's not day to day 1, 2, 10 people there just playing with software. There's obviously people doing that. They can get some value with it, but when you scale that up to hundreds, thousands of employees, you need a more controlled approach. So probably the biggest thing we have to do is make sure that there's no hallucinations, or to try and minimize that as much as possible, right? You can get away with that as a consumer. It gives you a dodgy answer or something you're not sure of. That's fine. You can go back, you can kind of laugh it off. But in some of the critical industries, that's just not possible. So how do you harness these models and put the guardrails around them, right? Using the power of the language they have, using all that technology, but making it safer against their own data, their own processes. That's where we spend a lot of our time, kind of sort of pin it down to just focus on the key things our customers need.
I've asked this question to a couple of people over the last few weeks because it sparked a certain thought process for me, which was, we and I think it's relevant to your point, is the tolerance for failure in humans is softer than our tolerance for failure in machines. And there was a point of view put forward that we should maybe have a higher degree of tolerance for failure in machines, which a lot of people, that's sparked they believe that's radical thinking, the idea that we would accept hallucinations and failure. But the systems you're working on, my assumption is failure is not acceptable.
Well, it depends exactly what you're looking at, right? I mean, I think there's no question that AI and machines are held to a higher standard than humans, right? I think that's human nature. It's the way we think about things. Something like self-driving cars, road traffic accidents are, one of the highest causes of death. But if you're going to get any examples of that with an AI, there's going to be much more focus on that than the crashes that happen every day. And rightly so, as we're building this technology out, because it's not clear whether it's the technology at fault or just this is the way things are, right? There's going to always be a few edge cases, but I think what you see in these industries is they've spent a lot of time creating rules, creating processes, creating guardrails to minimize the chance of a human doing something wrong. It's double checking stuff, triple checking stuff. People have to follow a very clear set of rules. Any data is signed off, by individuals, and there's that accountability, right? And so humans know that they have to step through these things. They can't take shortcuts. They can't go around it. And even if machines, AI can do that to some extent, the accountability is not yet there. And I think that's what makes the enterprises nervous, right? That's why human in the loop is so important, that there's always someone who can look over these things and tick it off, even if they're not having to do any of the work, right? In future cases, the AI is going to be getting things right in most of our industries, a vast proportion of the time, but that human oversight is still critical to a lot of the ways they work, because they're slow moving. They don't like change. They've put a lot of time into making things as safe as possible, and it's human nature to think about how they can keep that control, and they don't want to give that up yet.
So do you think so? When we talk about workflow optimization or using data to make better decisions in industry, can the AI not slot into that human function still within that risk process, as opposed to trying to rewrite the whole thing?
Exactly, right. And I think that's where that's where everyone's starting. It's right. Here are the parameters you're working within. This is the goal we're trying to achieve. But you can't go out and try anything to achieve that goal, right? There's a set of tools, there's a set of things to think about. Maybe you can find a better way of doing it than we're doing now. Absolutely. That's the way that these businesses can find optimization in their operations. But it's not a case, not that the AIs are capable of this, but it's not a case of just throwing it open and saying, go and find me oil in the North Sea, right? It's got to be fairly rigid, but still giving the flexibility to the AI to go out and try and make those benefits. But we're starting to see that, right? I think with process optimization, we work a lot with these very prescriptive processes, as I've mentioned. There's still a great starting point, right? There's a lot of time has been invested in these things to make them as effective and efficient as possible. But that doesn't mean they're the best they can be, or it doesn't mean they're as reactive as they can be when something goes wrong. I think that's probably the biggest thing is, if there's any change, something's not working as expected, that's where you typically still need the humans to come in, and requires all that knowledge and expertise, but a lot of time to correct that. And that's potentially where AI can be very effective, minimizing those disruptions and keeping things on track much, much faster.
Yeah, fascinating. So let's take the oil rig example in the North Sea, an inhospitable environment for human beings, highly reactive, dynamic environment. It feels as though when I look at technologies coming out of Boston Dynamics and humanoid robots, the Optimus robots with Tesla, is there an opportunity to be having AI embedded in humanoid robot form to operate on oil rigs, to operate on spaceships? Is that something we're going to start to see emerging as we realise, the risk to the human form isn't worthwhile if we can chuck a, machine with a level of intellect that allows it to run processes, but also be dynamic to the environment which it's within.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big developments is going to be that crossover of the AI and the physical world, right? I think we've seen these huge leaps forwards in terms of the digital world for AI, but it is around processes, as you say, right? Typically they have some kind of digital representation. There's still a lot more we can do with that. But once you start crossing over with robotics, you get to minimize those human risks. It's often this very well paid work as well for humans because of that risk they're having to take, but we're not best suited as a species to be doing a lot of these things. I think the question for all these companies will be, what happens if something goes wrong still, right? If these robots break or malfunction or, can't perform their task, you're still going to need some backups. You're still going to need the human oversight. Are the benefits of having the AI guided robotics, sufficient for me to take the human crew out from, being ready 24 hours a day, take that down to, just being on call. Can I get them there fast enough? Can I retrieve this situation? And, I think that balance we're in the infancy of finding that out. But as robotics advances in line with AI, it's inevitable you're going to see a lot more of these AI physical crossovers, especially in the harsh environments, as you say.
Well, Errol, who I had on a couple of months ago, is the head of emerging tech at Gartner. And he kind of said something to me, which it made me rethink, because I thought the idea of, synthetically intelligent robots was ridiculous. But what he kind of said was the built world is built around the human form. So, the optimum robot may be X, but it's not going to fit through a doorway. It's not going to fit on an access shelf on the side of an oil rig. And we're not going to spend trillions of dollars rebuilding retrospectively the human physical world. We may build new oil rigs that are very different and built around a different robot form. But if we're going to assume that we're going to start to fit in AI-driven automation into the human world, then they are going to be humanoid robots. So... would you say, and we'll talk about your role, you're in an extremely, impressive business at IFS that's behind so many functional things, whether it's airports, wind farms, oil rigs, aircraft carriers. You guys are there. Do you see this hybrid human-robot world evolving over the next 10 years? Do you think we'll see AI humanoid robots on aircraft carriers, on oil rigs?
In that time frame?
What I mean, you're leading this. What's your view?
Well, I'd say the technology and the ability for AI to do these things, I think, will be there in the next 10 years. But these industries are not, they're not resistant to change in that they don't want to do this. But as we've mentioned, with the safety and regulation, and the fact is that everything is designed around the humans, it is a massive change to their operations. So I think they're kind of feeling their way into this, right? So a lot of the things they're thinking about at the moment are much more on the building, on the manufacturing side, where they have that control. The day-to-day operations, they're really thinking about how can we get data to make better decisions, right? I mean, that's something in the airline industry. Obviously, it's been going on for years. Pulling data off aircraft on the engine performance and things like that. And so there's no question that all these big physical assets are becoming much more connected, and we're learning how to use that data to allow the businesses to make better decisions. I think once we've got that understanding of things, that might reshape how we think about deploying these robots, right? I don't think there's a huge appetite to just replace humans, one-to-one with robots, right? Doing human things the way they are now. Yes, as you say, physically, a lot of these large assets are engineered for humans, but we're going to want to find those efficiencies. We're going to want to find those points where a robot can potentially add the most value. So I think that discovery phase is still going on at the moment, while some of the robotics technology continues to evolve. And I think that AI, humanoid hybrid is not quite ready for the mainstream for a lot of these industries yet. And that will be a big crossover. But yeah, I think finding those sort of sweet spots to deploy it is really what we're focusing on.
I mean, one idea is coming to mind as we're talking, which is I see a lot of the ethical concerns around lithium mining in Africa, and you think that if there's an opportunity there to remove people from that process and put humanoids or cyborgs or robots or whatever in dangerous situations, it feels like the right thing, but then there's an impact on the communities and people too. I mean, I remember when I was a young lad, I always used to look at dream by going on the Lamborghini website, and the amount of Lamborghinis for sale in Aberdeen was crazy because there was an Aberdeen, halo effect from the North Sea oil. There was people making a lot of money up there buying expensive cars. How do we adopt technology into hardcore industry without having that impact on the working class, ambition?
I mean, it's a question that we face, right, in every industry, I think, right? As the technology evolves and AI becomes capable of fulfilling these more complex tasks, then I think we're going to see that, across the board. I think physical labor is probably, it's not immune from this, but I think that's probably not the highest threat from AI in terms of the workforce at the moment, right? I don't think we're looking at replacing entire workforces in the immediate future, because one, this technology is very expensive, right? It's all very well getting a humanoid robot to prove that it can do one of these roles as a one-off. To create a whole fleet of those, right? I think we're somewhere away from that being cost efficient. So I think that physical labor has probably got a little more protection than some of the other qualified fields where you can see the capabilities of these language models already. Again, I think human oversight is still critical to how they fulfill their jobs over the next few years. But yes, I think I'd be worrying about some of the other professions probably first over some of the those more physical roles, which I see humans being able to be very valuable in for a considerable amount of time.
You're a chief AI officer.
Yeah.
It's an emerging role and very necessary role. It feels as though it's in the center of this confluence of technology, humanity, efficiency, philosophy. There's a lot. It's quite a thoughtful role, I believe. If you're looking at these things just from a financial officer perspective, it's a spreadsheet, right? And to your point, humanoid robots, they're too expensive right now. There's going to be a point where they're commoditized for certain roles, certain tasks, and at some point it'll flip over financially. Yeah. From an AI or a chief AI perspective, what are you thinking about? What's your role? What are the values that you're bringing to your organization and therefore customers?
Yeah, so I think the role. Well, it's a very grandiose description of it from you, which is great. But
I did try to.
But it is a new role, as you say, right? And I think it's kind of the natural evolution of where things have gone with AI and data science over the last 10 years, right? If you look back, to 10 years ago, it tended to be that AI was the mathematicians, was the data scientists doing that work in silos, right? They would get hold of the data, someone would give them data, and they would go and prove out the concept of doing something, build a model, maybe find a way to productionize it at least, on a minimal basis, right? And then everyone was happy. It's like, well, AI can work, but it didn't have that strategic buy-in, right? It didn't have the senior stakeholders, the C-level in the business saying, I want that, right? I need that for my business. Our chairman last week actually made a good comment when I was talking to him. It's like, when I started at IFS around 6 years ago, the firm didn't need AI at that point, right? It wanted AI. It wanted to do a lot more with AI. But now in 2025, it needs it, right? If you're not doing AI and you're not really advanced with AI, you're not going to be successful. You're going to wither on the vine over the next year or so. So I think that the chief AI officer role has kind of developed into more of a strategic decision making around AI and how do we apply it, right? I've seen various different definitions, various people I know with a chief AI officer role. I think when it started out a year and a half or two ago, I was aware of a few people doing it. They mainly more had an internal focus on efficiencies, right? How can we use AI to go faster within these companies? But now it's picked up more of a thought around you control the data science, you control the technology. How should we be applying that strategically, right? I mean, what are the big challenges our customers face? And how can we bring technology to solve that? I think there's some crossover with chief data officer roles, CIO roles, but it's new in that it tends to be bringing this technology first approach in some ways, but always with that view as to what's the value here, right? How can we either make money from it or make us better, make us more efficient? And the people in it, I mean, certainly it's the case for me, tend to be coming from a more technical background, right? So it's a different, exec track, if you like, right? It's not the traditional MBA approach, or it certainly isn't for me, right? I've come from a very technical maths PhD background, spent my time building the models, doing the data science, found that, my passion and probably my skill set is now more about the application of these technologies. And a little bit further away from the coalface of doing the AI, if you like, and much more now about thinking the application of it. And that's the role that we've seen develop with the chief AI officer. So, for me, delighted because I was in the right place at the right time. But I think we're going to see a lot more over the next few years as AI hits the mainstream and starts providing value for these companies.
For me, that the point where we move from, and maybe we get into a bit more detail on this because you have such an amazing history, but when we move from batch ML processing, the old Hadoop days, the big data era, which was essentially, we're going to run our business and then overnight we're going to crunch a load of data and tomorrow we're going to do business better and we're going to increment over time. That's kind of how I see it. This point where we've moved, certainly in the consumer space, and I think business is probably dragging behind, that move to the real-time proactive application of AI inferencing, input in real time to processes, that's probably driven the need for this idea of having that AI consciousness within the leadership of an organization.
I think that's right. Certainly with the.
Do you see how the technology's gone through that pivotal point from batch to real time? Okay, but we need to think about this now in real time.
No, absolutely. But even for industries like IFS, right, that's in quite a traditional space in ERP or asset management or field service, there's always been elements of that are more operational, but the majority of it is a system of record, right? You're making relatively slow changes. You're having individual users interacting with the product, entering data, driving behaviors there. Certainly as we move towards more of an agentic world, right, where you've got agents operating in the background with these huge data volumes, making the decisions in near real time. Yes, I think, this is much closer to the way that companies are starting to think about their business and us as software vendors. And I think, all other vendors who are trying to support these companies, we need to be thinking more about those operations. I think it's interesting, though, is that traditional data science skills were more around, building those models, understanding the algorithms. Then we saw the rise of sort of data engineering and, being able to get those big data sets ready. And now that's increasingly real time. That's got more of a software engineering crossover now. Similarly with ML ops and DevOps starting to cross over a lot more. I think the skills you need, the mix you need for an AI team has evolved rapidly just in the last couple of years. We need much more of a software processor. Well, I mean, it's happening. It's happening as we speak, right? But it's not just about the data science knowledge anymore. There's a whole range of roles around AI that you need to support these businesses, as well as the understanding of their business, of their data, right? We're so far away from that group of people sitting in the corner playing with a big, set of numbers, right? I mean, that's just a very small part now of what delivering an AI solution actually means.
Is there a scenario where AI becomes the future of leadership of these businesses?
I think we're starting to see that already, right? I think there was it was a McKinsey study on it last year that was looking at maybe 25-30% of a CEO's role was kind of something that a digital CEO would be able to take on, right? When you're looking at the financial forecasting aspects, you're looking at the big strategic decisions, understanding the market, understanding how things are moving. AI, when it comes to forecasting, making predictions, it's already way beyond even the best human can be. The question is, can we get them all the data to make those decisions under uncertainty? But maybe not quite yet, right? But a lot of that is soon going to be available. But there's a lot of human skills that we still need to be able to run a business, to be a C-level exec. Particularly that accountability is still critical, but also the motivation aspects, some of the organizational aspects. I don't think we're quite ready as a society yet to be fully led by digital execs, but a lot of the work they do, I think, is being slowly sort of handed over. I think one area I was thinking about, and I got asked the question about replacing the CEOs quite recently as well. And I think when you think about disruption, moving into new markets, it's often the confluence of a couple of different industries or a new way of thinking about something that allows a new company to thrive in potentially a very staid sort of area that hasn't changed in 20, 30 years. I think AI would be fantastic at that, right? Assimilating all this data from across industries, the things that humans just don't have time to do. You know, typically someone who's going to be a disruptor, they might have a tech focus and maybe they've got experience in a certain industry. They can bring those things together. But an AI can be doing that much more easily. So I think those disruptive businesses, AI could do a lot more to found and drive those forward. I think we'll see a lot of that over the next year or two.
I mean, IFS must have a huge data set, like a cohesive cognition based on the data that you have and are creating would be one of the most fascinating language models or digital instantiations of intelligence that I can believe, whether it's, you know, connecting the dots between power generation from wind farms to power consumption in, you know, data centers to, you know, all of the assets and facets of your business, being able to connect those data points and put it into some sort of cohesive intelligence just sounds like it could be one of the most positive shifts for wider populations and humanity.
I think for us operating, you know, across a business's whole operations is
huge.
It's huge. It's maybe not quite unique, but it certainly puts us in a great position from that. From, you know, pulling data directly from the field to making the strategic decisions, and then putting people or assets, you know, back into the field. And making them operate more effectively. So, you know, that continuous cycle between your operations and the more strategic planning and how you can make that more real time. I think data, though, is still one of those things that I'll be careful how I say this, right? But it potentially holds us back in terms of we're still coming to terms with how we think about what data can and can't or should be shared and used, right? You know, I think with a lot of our customers day to day, a lot of their critical operations, the way they use their data, we don't access that, right? That's their data. Not only is it their IP, but it's critical to the way that they run their business. But there's certain things about the way that a particular turbine would run or engine would run that, you know, has application across a whole industry, across a whole range of companies. And I think these companies are getting better at starting to understand what they can share, what they can't, right? We've gone into quite a protective mindset at the moment. I think it's swung back a bit from the last couple of years where smaller AI companies would go in and just say, hey, give us your data, right? And we'll go and do cool stuff. And you still see a lot of that, but we're now starting to see a lot of these businesses think, well, actually, should I be giving up that data to you? What are you going to do with that, right? If you use that to fine tune an LLM or build a really, you know, excellent anomaly detection model, right? You know, are you effectively taking all the value from my business, right? Which we're seeing that complaint coming from a lot of the creative arts when it comes to LLMs as well. So I think we're starting to find that right balance. I think it will open up again. But even though in theory that data's all there, I think we still have a little way to go to sort of work out, you know, how we benefit everyone, right, from it, right, rather than just letting customers exist in these silos, which is kind of the way it needs to be at the moment, and we'll see that open up over time.
It does feel, and I get this sense, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a bit of a strategic tension, I think, in industry where production and pragmatism have to reign, because that's the reality of doing important work, and innovation and hype that, you know, is the reality of the tech industry, especially when, you know, consumer tech, and we've got figures like Elon Musk, Optimus robots running Grok 3, going to Mars next year, you know. So you're within this difficult motion of balancing production, like real production, and innovation. Like, how do you manage that on a daily basis? Because I get so excited by innovation, but then the pragmatic approach of, okay, is this going to work? What's its impact? What's the, you know, it's a constant balance. That sounds like something that's going to be pivotal to your success.
Absolutely, right? So I think it's one of those things where even if the technology is there, you've got all those bits around the technology that you have to think about and slowly bring into line, right? So you've got things like the new EU AI Act and what that means for a lot of the regulated industries. They're often not sure, right? So again, they're taking this conservative view, and there's a lot of back and forth at the moment, right? With lawyers, with data security specialists. We're still sort of finding that balance, and problem is with the pace of change in the technology. Of course, every time a new model comes in and you want to bring it into an enterprise, then your security specialists are terrified, right? Because the typical process for onboarding these things is much longer, right? And so reducing that time to getting value from the technology is critical to the software industry success and our success, right? You can't ignore these guardrails, but you have to find a way to automate the process around them. So you're still doing the checks, but you can automate those checks as far as possible, bring humans in to make those final calls, but you don't need these laborious back and forths. That's the way we used to work, right? A lot of these industries, they're working peripheral to the technology, or in tandem with the technology, are also playing catch up, right? Yes, they'll find their own use cases within the industry, but the whole way they need to work to facilitate these companies is changing, right? I think the appetite from the companies themselves is definitely there. I think they've been burnt a little bit with LLMs over the past few years. They haven't seen the benefits they were expecting, but that's because a lot of them didn't have realistic expectations. As you say, the hype on the technology is always going to lead. It takes quite a while for that value piece to catch up, and where 2024 was all about standing things up, getting them working. What we're seeing in 2025 is a lot of these companies turning around and saying, yes, but where is the benefit for me? How am I actually getting value from there?
So what KPIs are you tracking? What KPI to objectively work out whether this is actually building value?
Yeah, so I think we're kind of tracking them on both sides of the fence. So on the use case, the application side, and on the technology side itself, right? So on the use case side, we've always been good, and I think the software engineering generally is pretty good at working with customers to understand, well, how much faster can you do this if you've got AI embedded into it, or how much more efficient are you, how much of a better use are you making of your resources. And so from a KPI point of view, we try and benchmark it against, what are you doing now? If you brought this in, what benefits are it going to give you? It tends to still be at the sort of individual use case level. I think with the rise of agents, then we're starting to move much more towards the idea of a human digital worker, and then you're capturing value, all the way along the chain, right? You are starting to, I think a lot of the businesses are starting to equate that value to the benefit that a human can provide a little more, right? Which has both positive and negative, because I think you can then start to really assess the value to your business, but it's going to start businesses questioning a lot more about how many people they need to fulfill certain roles, right? And I think that's inevitably the way these things are going. On the technology side, we build a number of patterns that we think are going to be useful to our customers, things that are repeatable, things that we feel we can commercialize, because as you say, we keep coming back to the technology is changing all the time, but we just can't throw the technology as it comes in overnight and just give it to our customers. There's a whole set of thinking about the value that's going to bring. Does that allow us to make better predictions, do similarity search in a new way? We need to kind of explore some of those angles. So we build out those patterns, and we get faster and better at doing that, so we can bring in the new ideas as they come. And then we need to see what the uptake is, right? Are our customers actually using this? So you have regularly things that will sound great to us, and we think are going to be transformational to the businesses we work with. They don't necessarily strike the chord, right? So you need that constant feedback loop from your customers. If you can get it out there to them fast enough, though, you're getting that almost for free, right? Because we're moving to that much more real-time way of thinking. Customers are trying this stuff out, in production as well, giving you feedback, telling you the pros and the cons. You don't have to wait 6 months, 12 months, or even 2 years to get that feedback in the same way that you used to.
the whole software industry that's evolved around human optimization,
Yeah.
scheduling, like classical BPO in call centers.
Yeah.
What happens when everybody's an AI agent? What happens when those people have been replaced with AI agents that don't need to be scheduled? They work 24/7.
Yeah.
They work all the time they're just a digital algorithm. And maybe what requirements are needed around those? Do they get fatigued? Does their reinforcement learning kind of brings them to some dystopian negative point, handling complaints? I mean, I don't know what happens.
I think we've started to see that with our optimization and scheduling that we do for a lot of companies working with huge numbers of people in the field, trying to get them to the right place at the right time as quickly as possible with the right skills, tech. The traveling salesman problem at scale, right? We've been doing that for a number of years, and what we've seen is the appetite for customers to move fully to automation varies a lot, and not necessarily by industry, but there's a certain inherent risk that these businesses see because they've worked in a certain way that tends to be very human focused, very human led. They don't want to just suddenly shift to automating all these things. So we work with them on this kind of nudge like behavior to, okay, you tend to be very human led at the moment in your decision making, thinking about where people should go, what they should do. You've got that human oversight, someone who's making those decisions. We can start giving you recommendations, and you can factor that in, and then maybe some of those recommendations for the easier stuff. Well, again, we could take that off your plate, right? And you slowly start moving towards, from maybe 20% of things being automated to 30, 40. We have customers up in the 80s and 90s, right, where a lot of them are trying to get to. But it's still that last 10% is critical for the human to be there, at least at the moment, right? These edge cases, there are things that align with the way your business operates as a whole that we're not quite able to encapsulate in the optimization, in the machine.
But it's encapsulated in its people.
Yeah.
The people who get up every morning, commit to the work, commit to the customers of those organizations. There's a DNA of business in each and every representative, whether it's somebody climbing up a pylon, piloting a jet, serving food. They're all valuable, individuals who ideally would encapsulate the brand values.
Yeah.
Do you know? In a very human and empathetic way. That I don't think we can afford to lose that at any point.
No, so I think that's absolutely right. So that last 10%, we do see the humans still driving those those edge cases, those exceptions for a long time. But then if you think about what the AI is interacting with in these cases, all those people in the field, as you say, right, then they've got all this tribal knowledge that built up over 30, 40 years. I think a lot of the businesses we deal with, they worry about the fact that a lot of those people are coming to the end of their working careers. And how do you incentivize and get new people into those traditional industries to build up that DNA of the company, as you said, right? I think one of the biggest challenges we see a lot of our customers facing, a lot of industries facing, is that tribal knowledge. And AI is very good at helping with that transition. Now, what will that mean? That might mean that you don't get people coming through in the same way who are in the weeds of the business, doing all that work and building up the knowledge through experience. When you bring AI into it, that's not necessarily going to happen in the same way. And I think you see that for manufacturing, potentially heavy industry. You also see it in other fields like the legal profession, right? Where, newly qualified lawyers are going to be working huge hours to build up that experience, that kind of muscle memory that they can then apply down the line, where you need that more strategic thinking that an AI can't do yet and is probably a little bit away from. But how do we create the next generation of humans who are going to have that knowledge? I think that's a real challenge, right? So we have to have them working alongside the AI in a way that they continue to evolve and learn and learn the DNA of those businesses.
I mean, this is a fascinating idea. My mind is thinking, if you look at the different phases of career, take the law industry, you'll end up with hungry, aggressive lawyers willing to take edge cases.
Yeah.
Learning and as they go, risk averse. As they get older, they get the knowledge. It's monetizing that, more risk averse, slower, less open to learning the latest and greatest. So businesses, probably large corporates, will go through waves. Based on average age of employee, average tenure, blah blah blah. So you're always looking at keeping that talent pool fresh. But AI doesn't have that concept. It's constantly being iterated and incremented in a way that doesn't have that, well, maybe does have a diverse set of philosophical approaches to the work. Or is it just optimized for each transaction? It could totally shift growth of it. It has the potential to totally shift the growth of large organizations, by just infusing behaviors into each and every transaction. I think about British Airways. I love British Airways. In Europe, I always fly British Airways.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons is because of the cabin crew. They're always smiling. They're always positive. I like the way, you feel a little bit of Britain as you're getting on. You know what I mean? There's, but to lose that, do you lose something?
You do, undoubtedly, right? I mean, I think humans like talking to other humans, interacting with other humans, right? I think there's a lot more cases now of where they will accept an AI doing things for them, right? But even with that constant sort of creeping of more and more AI into the consumer world, there's still that human touch point which is critical to people, right? And a lot of those industries, a lot of those jobs, you don't see them being replaced anytime soon.
What's your biggest win in the role? You've been in the role 18 months. What's your proudest moment so far?
Proudest moment? Well, I think the thing is that I've been in this role 18 months, but I've been with the company for 6 years, and I look back to where we were then. I think we had this vision of what AI could and would become, but as I've said, it was not the critical part of the business then. But we did a lot of that hard graft in the background, right? You're building out the architecture. You're trying to think about how are our customers going to use this. They want to be able to consume AI without necessarily knowing they're consuming AI. It wants to talk the language of their business. It just wants to be a part of their product. It doesn't want to be a separate thing on the side. So, we spent a long time building that out. So the biggest win really was then when we were able to properly release that last year, which was our first release of 2024, and say, okay, well, that platform to drive AI, that's now here. It's ready to go. We've been doing POCs, we've been doing bits on the side, some things we've been doing with AI for a long time, but to go at scale, this is the time. And I think once we had that and leadership were confident that we had the technology to drive this forward, suddenly we've seen everything change, right? The whole commercialization model around AI, all the regulatory pieces, basically everyone getting on the AI train. I think that's my proudest moment. Is it's not just me driving AI anymore, far from it. It's like, we're an AI first company now. And that whole mindset, that feels like the culmination of what me and the team have been working for. And of course, it's not just us, right? The whole LLM, explosion over the last couple of years has helped put that in the mainstream and make everyone realize that this is the way to go. But I feel that all that work we put in and finally sort of vindicated now, and we're ready to really go.
So this, it feels like this 18 months has been a significant cultural shift reflective of what the market's doing and what technology is doing. What advice would you give to, a equivalent enterprise organization who maybe isn't as evolved as you are? What lessons you've learned on that journey in terms of moving to AI first and accepting AI as a augmentation tool with your business?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different advice to where it was a few years ago, right? I mean, I think now the critical thing is that you can't just be thinking about doing AI in a vacuum. I keep coming back to this idea of the data scientists in a room working on things and sort of doing the POCs and not being able to move forward. Proof of concepts, I mean, when I say POCs, of course. But now you need to really be thinking about everything else around the AI that you'd need to get that running in your business, right? How's it going to change your monetization strategy? How are you going to be able to deliver this at scale to all your users or to all your employees, right? You've suddenly got a whole host of costs that you wouldn't have had before. You're dealing with lots of companies and services probably never dealt with that are changing all the time. It's not a case of just opening up a ChatGPT window for your employees and off you go. So that my biggest advice is, it's scary advice. It's going to be a complete transformation process for your business. And it's not just about algorithms. It's not just about AI on its own. It's about everything else that opens up to you and what that's going to mean for your business as a whole. When I think about, what defines a business or what's going to define a business over the next few years, if you're being brutally honest, it's going to be your data. So the things you have access to that can differentiate you, and your domain knowledge, right? Your ability to solve specific problems that others can't. That's your barrier to entry, because the technology is not going to be a barrier to entry, right? It's becoming more and more commoditized. It's going to be about how you use that technology and can you use it in a way others can't because you got better data. So those are the things businesses need to think about. And yeah, they can't shy away from this or, they're going to be dead.
You're engaged in many different areas, including MIT. What do you do with those?
So MIT, we work with what's called the SCISA program, and this is really MIT's research arm that looks at how data and AI are being applied in industries. So it's a set of academics there, very focused on sort of surveys, case studies with businesses to understand these big questions, that we've been discussing, how a business is changing and operating, to think about the rise of AI and what do you need to do as a company. So, big focus on data readiness, how have you got yourself in place, a big focus on scalability. And so these academics are the ones sort of driving that thinking forward, and writing the papers and the research that kind of shapes the overall thinking for where these industries are going. But the big challenge they have is that the traditional way of working in academia is now getting faster and faster. When you look at AI with all these new models coming out, they're not focusing on the technology, or this arm at least of MIT is not. Of course, MIT has incredible mathematicians, physicists, data scientists working on the real complex AI problems themselves, or the foundation models. This is much more about the application of those models to businesses. So it's not changing as fast. And there are a number of principles that we've talked about. They're the sort of things they're looking at, but it's still fast enough that if you survey companies, in 2024, and it takes you a year to publish your research, get that into a journal, turn it around, the world's moving on, right? So we work with them closely, and that cycle is getting shorter and shorter. But they're a fantastic bunch of people. We've really enjoyed working with them. I've enjoyed my interactions with them and learned a lot about some of these more standardized ways of thinking around data and AI and how it transforms businesses. And we get to speak to, I think the nice thing is we get to speak to a lot of people from very diverse industries, companies. Software industry is one, but you've got banks, you've got manufacturing firms, you've got a whole range of businesses, all with their own challenges. So there's areas of synergy, there's areas of things that are you're facing the same problems. I couldn't get that LLM working on this, on that. But there's going to be differences as well. So that MIT scissor umbrella is what brings it together.
Many people I've spoke to, Bob, are at the front line of the application of AI. However, you have this unique position where you really are influencing the way the world hangs together with this technology. You have a deep experience in academia and an ongoing thirst for learning, including the work you're doing with MIT and others. Yep. You're touching many industry verticals and businesses and brands that influence a huge percentage of the global population. You've evolved, or in the process of ongoing evolution of an enterprise, to be AI first and embrace these technologies in a very pragmatic way without being derailed by hype. Bob, do you believe AI will take us to a utopia or dystopia?
That's the big one, isn't it, Ian? But I'm positive for utopia on this, right? I mean, I see us trending into a good position, right? I mean, I think we've got to learn and adapt ourselves and our whole society for how we work with AI, and I think that will take some time, and we've got to get faster at regulating, and the governments need to get faster at being able to move with technology. I'm going for utopia on this one.